Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose on the forgotten collectible card games of old. Those collectible card games which have maybe a few people still play, but they've mostly fallen by the wayside, and very few of them have any kind of production related to them anymore, if any cards being sold or created at all. Let's continue with Vampire the Eternal Struggle. We were talking about the rules of the game. We talked about what your crypt cards were before, and we started talking about the library cards you have. Let's hit one of the major sections of library cards, minion cards. Now, minion card basically means you have to be played by one of your minions, which are your vampires and allies you have out in play. So you need a vampire or ally. It will be playing this minion card, and unless the card says itself, after whatever it does is done, it's burned. So, it will say if it stays out in play, or if it doesn't, you're going to assume it's burned. Any minion card you basically play, it's considered controlled by you, even if you're basically using your minion to play it. Now, minion cards will have things like requirements. It might have a clan, blood requirement, discipline requirement. You need to have the minion that is playing this minion card basically meet those requirements in order for it to play it. That means you have to have a certain clan, amount of blood that they can spend, or disciplines. Just similar to what we were talking about with your master cards, except this time, rather than you having a minion out in play that does it, the minion itself, which is playing this card, has to meet these requirements. Now, there are some allies that you have, which allies being non-vampires, that can count as vampires when it comes to cards. These allies, when it talks about anything that uses blood, gain or loss to it, you're going to be using the ally's life to basically gain or lose life. If it talks about capacity, you're going to consider the capacity 1 for this ally. If an effect would basically grant it more life than its capacity, it still gains that. If it would be taking damage that would be aggravated, it will still burn away as normal. If it would be put into torpor, instead it is burned. It effectively isn't a vampire, but for the effects of the single card you are playing, it would count as a vampire for that card that you are playing. Now let's talk about the types of minion cards there are. There are action cards. An action card would be played by a minion to effectively replace what its normal default actions you could do on the course of a turn would be. So if you don't want to do any default actions, I could play an action card on this minion and allow them to take this action instead. I cannot play more than one action card on a minion on a turn. Basically, I'm only replacing its action once with a new action that I'm playing in card form. An action card cannot modify another action card. But we talk about the second type of card, action modifiers. Action modifiers do exactly what it sounds like. They modify actions. They do some kind of enhancement or basically positive or negative effect to an action. And the only caveat on them is you cannot play the same action modifier on an action more than once a turn. So I've played my action. Maybe I have 2 of the same action modifier. I can only play one of them. But if I have 2 different action modifiers, I could play both of them on this action. So I can modify this action as much as I want. They all have to be different action modifiers. Now, combat cards are played during combat. I will dive into combat a little more later, but just know that you're going to be using combat cards during combat. Now, grouped together are ally, equipment, and retainer cards. It takes you an action to bring any of these cards into play. Meaning, if I would play one of these, it is the action that this minion is taking a turn to either put out that equipment, to put out that retainer, to put out that ally. Equipments and retainers are basically attached to the minion that is playing them. They become part of it. Allies become separate entities in and of themselves. Basically, you can use a minion to summon an ally to also basically work on its own as its own creature. The thing is that if your minion gets burned, if it has any equipment or retainers attached to it, they get burned with it. Political cards, which are a little interesting, can be used to call upon a referendum as an action. If you have a political card in your hand and it's during a referendum, you can actually burn it for a vote. Now, a reaction is basically played by a minion in response to an action being played by another Methuselah's minion. So there's another Methuselah, their minion doing something, I could play a reaction in response to it as long as I have an untapped and ready minion. that's using this one. This does not tap the minion that I'm using it, and I cannot play the same reaction more than once against the same action. I can, of course, play different ones to react to that action. I also cannot react to my own actions. This is going to be the action of a different Methuselah, a different player, and their minion. A reflex card is basically played by a minion to cancel some kind of card that is attempting to affect it. So I play my reflex to basically cancel out some other kind of card. Now let's move on to another type of library card, the event. The event is made to basically affect the entire World of Darkness, the entire game. It is played during your discard phase, and you can play then one event. So you can only play one event per discard phase you have. You can only play one of an event per game. That means you cannot repeat the same event every game. You can only play an event once per game. And as I said, it affects everyone, but if it mentions a controlling Methuselah, you are the controlling Methuselah. So you are the one that is controlling the event that's being played. Important to note for some of them. Now let's begin by going over a few rules of getting started. I'm going to dive into a lot more of these next time, but first off, let's talk about order of play. This is an important one. Now granted, you're all going to determine the order everybody goes in once play actually begins, but you're going to have to know that the player to your left is your prey. The object that you have as the one going after them, the predator, is to oust them from the game. Basically remove your prey from the game. The player to your right is your predator. They're attempting to oust you from the game, and you're protecting yourself against them. So you're protecting yourself from the right, you're going after the left, and should I oust the person on the left, then their prey becomes your new prey. So the next person in line going to the left becomes your new prey. So basically your prey's prey is your new one. Now, you're going to, of course, have a blood bank, a blood pool of 30 when you start the game. Any remaining tokens you have are going to be put into a blood bank. It is important to note here that this blood bank, which is a combination of all the blood, is limitless. You might not have enough tokens, but it still always counts as limitless if it really comes up to it and matters if something might pool from the blood bank that exists. It will always have something to pull from. This pool is going to be in the center area of the game. It's also important that edge will be placed in that center of the area game because it's going to be uncontrolled at the start of the turn. So that's it for today. I went over the rest of the library cards, at least generally speaking. I talked about the minion cards, went over some basic rules of it, and a bunch of the different types of minion cards that you can use. I then went over events, basically things that affect all players at once. And then I went over a few basics of setting up the game. I talked about, of course, some of the order of play, the matter of who you're going after, who you're defending against, and I talked about just setting that blood bank right in the middle of it. In the next episode, I'm going to dive even deeper into starting the game, then move into playing the game and the various phases that you're going to go in, diving into each of these phases separately so that you understand basically what you're doing in every portion of the game as you're playing it. But anyway, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows you for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. Regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.